All right, there is this important and very sensitive issue that I want to bring to you people today. But before we continue, just watch this video.
Thank you for joining. Where are you from, Mr. Richie Rich?
I'm from Nigeria, Imo State.
All right, thank you for joining. So what are your thoughts on this topic? Scam, Biafra, scam or struggle?
I'm a bit confused. I don't know why you call it a scam. And I want you to explain to me why you think Biafra is a scam.
All right.
Please.
How long have you been here, please?
I think an hour now.
All right. I believe you should have heard me explain it. I explained it to Mr.
So what's the way forward? If you think...
Tell us why it's a struggle then. Like, come and tell us your opinion on why it's a struggle. We say it's a scam, you say it's not a scam. So tell us why it's a struggle. Don't ask us for the way forward. We'll talk about what you think first before we go to the way forward.
Because I think we are not meant to be one Nigeria from
why
the very
do you
start.
think that is? Give us your reasons.
Because how we are treated in Nigeria as Igbos, we are not treated equally.
How are you being treated?
We are not treated equally as other tribes in Igbos. In Nigeria, I mean.
How are you not being treated equally, Mr. Richie Rich? What is it in
Ma, you know what I'm saying. You know I'm saying
that other people can do.
Ma, you know I'm saying the truth.
So what
is
now in Nigeria?
I'm just asking you. This is why they make you guys take exams for English. You said that you're not being treated well, and I'm saying tell us how you're not being treated well. You know the truth.
Okay, in the past, let me say 20 years, an Igbo man has not been the president of Nigeria. Is that false or is that truth or lie?
Has an Hausa man been the president?
Yes, of course.
Name the Hausa president that we've had.
Yar'Adua is from where?
It's Fulani.
Oh, Jehovah.
Yar'Adua is Fulani. Which other one you want name? Yar'Adua na Fulani. Which other one you want call?
If I say Buhari, you say it's Fulani also.
It's Fulani now.
You already know the answer. You already know the answer. You still talk, you will say. Tell us the Hausa one. Now the Hausa one we will define. Tell us the Hausa one.
But I believe Fulani and the Hausas are the same.
That is your belief. Igbo and Ijo, are they the same? Igbo and Akwa Ibom, are they the same?
Ma, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to fight with you. You are just acting as if...
No.
Nobody. I'm glad you're here.
No, she's acting as if I said I came to learn.
They amuse me. No.
We don't disrespected you. We are responding to you, right?
We are responding to you now.
She's acting as if I'm saying, no, I'm here to learn, ma. I'm not here to argue with you.
Mr. Irich.
I'm not here to argue with you at all.
No, it's fine. It's just how my face is. But we the reason why I'm asking you that question is because in my so that you will understand, you will know that I'm literally being serious now. If you believe in something, the way for you to prove that thing that you believe is true is for you to test it. So that's really what we are doing. We're kind of engaging this in like how Igbos are treated in Nigeria. So that's why I was like, okay, Nyanya as an example, and you said presidency. So instead of just going into that, man, I said, okay, like as a major tribe, Igbo is a major tribe, Hausa is the major tribe, right? And Yoruba is a major tribe. Hausa people have not been president. You said no, they have been. But now you didn't know that there's a difference between Fulani and Hausa. But you assumed that. So I'm hoping that by the time I know Kucha, different. Just because you think that Ndi Hausa and the Fulani would the same, and just because you assume that everybody who's from the north who speaks Hausa is an Hausa person, does not make that true. So it's just that we've been here for 4 hours saying the same thing over and over again, and it's kind of like, almost repeating, because all this type of ignorance and misinformation, right? Then guess on your can't guess no one, giga no londia gabonya. I got an igara and jemu basara in him. It is now money I can't say, but not. I can't get back is what
No, drama.
so if you feel like Igbo, because you have every right to feel like disenfranchised, because you sound like a young person. Every young person not in Nigeria, I've said it before, the real marginalization in Nigeria is against poor people. If you come from a family in Ejihuego, your family just like my mom would say, they are just basically struggling to live everyday life. Life is going to be terrible for them. But in Imo State, you are not more marginalized than somebody who's from Kogi State. In fact, they are all they got their states. But what that means is that because he won Igbo. Ndị ọzọ na-enweghị ego mana nwoto si bụrụ ha ndị na-enweghị ọrụ ndị Nigeria na-anaghị eleta ọfụma like anaghị enye ha the things they had deserve as being members of the society. If that is the conversation we are having, then you guys say, oh, I na-eme ndị Igbo taa. But if this na na-eme ndị Igbo, gwazie anyị otu esi na-eme ndị Igbo, ikwele presidency, asị gị na ndị Hausa agaghị, ikwere ka ikwetegị ka ịchọ ka anyị ga, do you want us to go?
No, yeah, thank you for all you said. I really like how you approach
Rich, I'm also going to commend you on your honesty of saying you came here to learn. I appreciate that. So at least you don't learn one thing. Is there any other argument you have?
No, not at all.
Okay. Do you want us to continue?
I really like the program.
But if you want to add something else, because the reason why I want to speak to you in Igbo, even though I have the role, I say, is because I want you to know that I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Ignorance is not a bad thing. I don't know everything. And Kachi don't know everything. Mura and Kachi are always arguing about something at some point. But you came here and you said, I really want to learn. So when he also like that is confusing to you about maybe Biafra agitation, because now we can have support, but then when they buy or seaports or international airports, you have many feel
Joma, leave seaport, Joma, leave seaport.
I'm owing people seaports, I beg, make I just stop them now. So if you have questions in those regards, you can also ask them while you have your 2 minutes, and we can answer you and also educate in the Namaha.
Yeah, I want to ask another question. The way Nnamdi Kanu is taking the Biafra, is he doing the right thing or is he taking it the wrong way?
Oh, okay. I think that's
I came a bit late. I didn't hear anything about that.
Oh, you didn't hear it. Okay, yeah. So the IPOB agitation, I'm going to answer you in 1 minute. The IPOB agitation, as we know it, as it started from, Kano and all the other people that came, has cost Ali Igbo. Omele obutere Nkewa Ntisa. You know what Nkewa Ntisa is? It's destruction and division, and it also brought which is death. Do you agree or not?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. So onye merene Nkewa Ntisa abia na family ya. Ọ dị ka ị ga na ga nwaanyị ya abia na family unu ya ga wete Nkewa Ntisa. Ị ga sị na ihe ahụ ihe ọma ka ihe ọjọọ. Would you say that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, ihe ọjọọ.
So now, after Richie, after you leave this room, think about everything you have ever believed about this struggle. If you believe that Kano was doing the right thing, or Wazike was doing the right thing, or Ekpa is doing the right thing, why would we, if Nigeria they do us, why is Osu like that? Why is Lilu like that? The same people you say you want to liberate, why did they have to bear the burden of the agitation? When you're thinking about it, these are the things I want you to think about. If this thing was about getting it right for Igbo, because of the treatment that other people are doing it, why did we now take that treatment to Osu, to Lilu, to Idato, to Mbitolu? Why did we sit at home? Why did we do it upon ourselves? I think should lead you closer to the truth. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate for all the whole teachings, because I'm learning so much this night from you guys.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for coming.
Thank
All right,
you,
bye-bye.
Rich. Appreciate you.
You see, person when they race for America, now me come they teach kachi fuguya. You see,
Unbelievable.
Kachi, sorry, Igbo, tell him. Which you speak before?
Ogenekwa. Don't be my fault. Now the reading they be the problem. I don't see how I don't see how
Ogenekwa. Me say they won't understand what you mean. Say, maybe now I saw me job, Port Harcourt.
Oh my God, man. Ogenekwa. Now wow, make una no vex for me. Make una no vex for me.
No, we know the best for you. Igbo na Igbo, man. You know, no matter any Igbo way you start speak up like that. Oh, join.
I'm trying.
You try.
All right, you have watched the video. In case if you did not get anything, you can still go back to watch it. But me, I will not say anything here in this video. I will not say anything, but I will talk in the comment section. I will talk during comment section. And I want you, if possible, if you have anything you want to say in that regards, you say it in the comment section. Why do you think Igbos are being marginalized in Nigeria? If you have something to say it in the comment section. If you don't have something to say, you leave it. Stay silent. But click on the like button, share the video, because I want this video, if possible, to get to many Igbo people. And I am going to make a follow-up video after this. Follow-up video in the sense that these are the things that people say Igbos are passing through in Nigeria. Yes. Why I say this thing and why I want this thing to be like this is that some people may not really get this question, the answers at hand, at fingertips. If you feel that Igbos are not marginalized, you should have your good reason at your fingertips, and you feel that Igbos are being marginalized. You should have your answers at the fingertips to be sure of what you are doing. So I know that somebody asks you this question, you become destabilized initially, and even if you are providing answer, you are dumbling up and down. So I don't want to let it be that it's an open something. I don't want to, influence. I don't want to, as a creator, I don't want to influence people's decision. So let's meet in the comment. Then they will talk. Yes, that is the way I feel. I feel this way that it will be better, so that many people are going to learn and have these things readily available in this video.
Is there an unwritten rule that says an Igbo man cannot rule Nigeria? Like I said, I'm not interested in what tribe you're from or what party you're in. I'm more interested in you as a person. If you can deliver, if you cannot deliver, let me know. What's your manifesto? What are you standing for? That's me. That's my stance. But have you also noticed that when it comes to an Igbo man ruling this nation, it's almost as if it's true?
However, what we are doing here is to educate ourselves and, stand on the path of the truth and progress. Because where there is injustice, you hardly see progress and peace. So peace, progress, justice is a kind of foundation where through, progress resides.
A former mayor in the United States has done what Nigerian opposition politicians, civil society leaders, and even respected statesmen have spent years tiptoeing around. Standing before members of the United States Congress on April 24th in a presentation titled Nigeria at the Crossroads, The Case for Action, Mike Arnold told American lawmakers that the breakup of Nigeria is, in his words, likely inevitable and just. He did not say it might happen. He did not say it could be considered. He told the most powerful legislative body on earth that the dissolution of Africa's most populous country is both coming and morally defensible. He went further. he called for the indictment and arrest of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and senior officials of the Nigerian government on charges of genocide. He compared trying to negotiate with the current Nigerian leadership to working with the Third Reich to end the Holocaust. And he called for a referendum that would allow Nigerians to vote freely on whether they want to remain a single country at all. The entire country is now talking about it, and the federal government, for reasons that should worry every thinking Nigerian, has not produced a single coherent response. Arnold is a man who has built his case over years of sustained work. He is the founder and chairman of Africa Arise International and Africa Arise USA. These are organizations that have campaigned consistently on what they describe as Christian persecution in Nigeria and on the unresolved question of Biafran self-determination. He has been to Nigeria. He has met government ministers. He has, by his own account, sat in the living room of former President Goodluck Jonathan and discussed the country's deteriorating security situation. He has authored a book on the subject titled Epicenter, which became a bestseller within days of release. In October last year, he traveled into Nigeria on what was meant to be a government-sponsored public relations tour. Instead, he used the press conference Abuja arranged for him to publicly accuse the Nigerian state of genocide. That single moment drew over 3 billion impressions across global media within 72 hours. So when he stood before the US Congress in April 2026 and called Nigeria a British colonial contraption designed to fail, he was not speaking off the cuff. He was delivering a position he has spent years building in a venue capable of turning that position into US policy. The substance of what Arnold told Congress is what makes the story dangerous for Abuja. Regardless of what one thinks of him personally, the facts speak for themselves. He laid out a chain of arguments designed to move American lawmakers from concern to action. He reminded them that on October 31st, 2025, President Donald Trump redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act. He then argued that, far from improving conditions, the designation has been followed by an intensification of attacks on Christian communities. He cited the March 3rd Ngoshe massacre, the Kwara State Church attack, the Palm Sunday Angwan Rukuba massacre, and the April 2026 Jos Pastor Bounty case. He drew specific attention to the Islamic cleric in northern Nigeria who placed a 1 million naira bounty on the head of Pastor Emmanuel Sunday Gaba in Jos for allegedly insulting the Prophet Muhammad. The same cleric then doubled the bounty to 2 million naira on camera while daring the Department of State Services to come and arrest him. As Arnold pointed out to the lawmakers, no charges have been filed, no arrest has been made, no formal condemnation has been issued by any tier of the Nigerian government. He contrasted that silence with the November 2025 conviction of Nnamdi Kanu, the IPOB leader, who was sentenced to life imprisonment on terrorism-related charges. Kanu was transferred 800 kilometers to Sokoto within 24 hours of sentencing, far from his family and legal counsel. That contrast is the spine of his presentation, and it is the spine of why Nigerians across ethnic, religious, and political lines are reacting so sharply. A Southern self-determination activist gets life imprisonment and is moved to the seat of the Sokoto Caliphate. A Northern cleric publicly puts a price on a Christian pastor's head and walks free. The two cases sit on opposite sides of the same scale of justice, and the imbalance is visible to anyone with eyes. Arnold did not invent that contrast. He simply named it in front of the United States Congress in a country whose foreign policy increasingly views Nigeria through the prism of religious persecution. Whether one believes Arnold is a sincere advocate or a foreign agitator with a political agenda, the underlying facts he cited are not disputed. They are documented, they are public, and they are happening on the watch of a government that, on the same day Arnold was testifying, was busy receiving endorsements from FCT Yoruba leaders for Tinubu's 2027 re-election bid. The most controversial part of the presentation, and the part that has dominated reaction across Nigerian social media, is Arnold's framing of separation as inevitable and just. He grounded that claim in colonial history. He argued that the Nigerian Federation was an artificial British construction, never designed to function. He drew historical parallels to other colonial partitions that ultimately failed or required restructuring. India and Pakistan in 1947, Sudan and South Sudan in 2011, the dissolution of British Somaliland and Cyprus. He revisited the Civil War, citing Federal Office of Statistics and World Bank data. He argued that the Eastern region under Premier Michael Okpara had achieved some of the highest sustained growth rates in Africa before 1967. He accused the British government of materially supporting the food blockade that starved between 1 and 5 million Igbo civilians, mostly children, into death. He told the lawmakers that multiple Red Cross and Joint Church Aid Relief aircraft were shot down during that blockade. None of this is new history. It has been written about for decades. What is new is the venue. A U.S. congressional hearing is not a Sahara Reporter's comment thread. It is the place where American sanctions begin life as conversations. The Tinubu government has so far chosen a strategy that is becoming familiar. It has not engaged. There has been no statement from the presidency directly addressing Arnold's allegations. The Ministry of Information has not held a press conference. The Foreign Affairs Minister has not summoned the US ambassador. Instead, Nigeria's response has been outsourced to lobbyists in Washington and London, the kind of firms Arnold himself mentioned in his earlier writings. The firms paid millions of dollars to repackage government failures as security challenges and to reframe the killing fields of the Middle Belt as farmer-herder conflict driven by climate change. That strategy may have worked when the audience was a few foreign correspondents passing through Abuja. It is not working now. The American conversation about Nigeria has moved, and it has moved in a direction Abuja did not anticipate and does not know how to reverse. What makes this moment particularly volatile is the broader political backdrop inside Nigeria itself. Arnold's testimony has not landed in a stable country. It has landed in a country still reeling from the November 2025 declaration of a nationwide security emergency, the first in Nigerian history. It has landed in a country where mass abductions of school children in Niger, Kebbi, and Kwara have become so routine that the news cycle has stopped pausing for them. It has landed in a country where the People's Democratic Party is collapsing into factional warfare, where the police recently tear-gassed the party's national headquarters at Wadata Plaza, where Oyo Governor Seyi Makinde has just invoked the violent memory of Operation Weti to warn against creeping one-party domination. It has landed in a country where US Senator Ted Cruz has separately accused the Nigerian government of being aware of policies fueling Christian persecution. The Arnold testimony is not an isolated event. It is one more weight on a structure that is already groaning under its own contradictions. There is an instinct among Nigerian officials and among many Nigerian commentators to treat foreign criticism as an insult to national sovereignty and to wave it away as imperialist meddling. That instinct deserves to be examined honestly rather than performed reflexively. It is true that the United States has its own interests. It is true that Mike Arnold has his own ideological position on Biafra. And it is true that no country should outsource its political future to the opinions of foreign actors. All of that is correct. But none of it answers the actual question Arnold raised. The actual question is whether the Nigerian state is currently performing the basic functions a state owes its citizens, and whether the failures we are watching are accidents of administration or features of a structure that no longer works. A nation that cannot keep school children safe in their classrooms, that negotiates ransom payments with bandits, that cannot arrest a cleric who places a bounty on a citizen's head on video, and that responds to the disappearance of millions of internally displaced persons by pretending the camps do not exist. That nation has a credibility problem that no PR firm in Washington can fix. Foreign critics can be wrong about many things and still be correct that something is deeply broken. The deeper discomfort Arnold has provoked is that he has named what Nigerian elites have spent 60 years insisting must never be named. The unity of Nigeria has long been treated as a sacred premise rather than a political achievement, something one is patriotic to assert and traitorous to question. That posture made sense in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, when the trauma of that conflict made any conversation about separation feel like inviting catastrophe. It makes far less sense in 2026 because the very thing the unity argument was meant to prevent, mass killings of Nigerian citizens by armed actors operating with apparent impunity, is happening anyway, every week, in multiple states at once. A country that holds itself together by forbidding conversation about its structure while failing to deliver security, justice, or economic dignity to most of its people is not actually held together. It is simply postponing the conversation that it cannot avoid forever. What Nigerians are wrestling with in the comment sections and the WhatsApp groups, in the church meetings and the market gatherings, is the uncomfortable recognition that Arnold's diagnosis lands harder than his solution. Most Nigerians do not want to break up the country. They have spent too much of their lives building lives, marriages, businesses, and friendships across the lines that separation would harden. But many of them also know in private that the current arrangement is not working. They know that the men and women they elect arrive in Abuja and forget where they came from. They know that the constitution they live under was handed down by a military regime in 1999 without genuine popular consent. And they know that the Nigerian project, as currently constituted, runs more on inertia and oil than on consent or competence. Arnold's testimony is forcing that private knowledge into public conversation, and that is the part the government cannot lobby its way out of. The honest reading of this moment is that Mike Arnold is not the threat. He is the messenger. The threat is the underlying reality his message describes. A government that wanted to defeat his argument would not need lawyers and lobbyists. It would need to produce the cleric who placed the bounty on Pastor Gaba in handcuffs by next Friday. It would need to publish a transparent register of every IDP camp in the country with real numbers and real conditions. It would need to convene a genuine national conversation about restructuring. not as a concession to separatists, but as a serious attempt to make the federation work for the people inside it. It would need to stop treating the survival of an administration as more important than the survival of citizens. None of those things are happening. What is happening instead is silence in Abuja and noise in Washington, and the noise is winning. Nigerians who care about the future of their country, regardless of where they stand on Arnold himself, should understand that the conversation he forced into the open is not going back into the box. The only question now is whether Nigeria's leaders will engage with it honestly while there is still time, or whether they will wait until the answer is no longer theirs to give.
Now, the issue of the United States demand for the proscription of Sharia, I think it is a very serious, fundamental human rights concern to the Muslims of northern Nigeria or Nigeria in general. I think that demand would never be practicable as far as Nigerian Muslims are alive. The issue of their right to religion is non-negotiable and cannot be taken away by any system. For even the colonial masters, when they came, they tried hard to take away the Sharia, but they could not do that. So I think it is, in a way, I may say, laughable that the United States would think that the Muslims would drop their religious right over and above the demand of the United States.
Prof, let's use an example, the Deborah case in Sokoto. What was the issue? They were in a WhatsApp group, and then she made some statement that persons within the Muslim community were not comfortable with, and they considered it blasphemy, and she was killed. And the case was an embarrassment, literally, because of how it was prosecuted. I think that case was left off because of lack of diligent prosecution, because of what was even filed in the first place. People expected murder and all those kind of charges to be filed, but all kinds of things were filed, and it was a bit of an embarrassment. So should Sharia law have applied to somebody like Deborah, who is not a Muslim?
Well, I cannot hear you.
Should I repeat the question?
I lost. You repeat the question because I didn't get the last part.
The latitude of the implementation of the Sharia law itself. And I gave an example of Deborah that was killed because of blasphemy. She's a Christian. The Muslim guys in our WhatsApp group were not comfortable with what she said, and they considered it a blasphemy, and they killed her. We can talk about the court case another day. But what I'm saying, should Sharia law have applied to Deborah in this instance? Because the argument is, for some people, it's not the existence of Sharia law, it's the latitude of Sharia law beyond Muslims.
Okay. I lost the audience. I can't hear you.
How many of you remember the sacrifice of this guy to the people of Biafra? This guy you are seeing here, he sacrificed his life for the people of Biafra. His name is Bruce Mayrock, an American student of Columbia University, who set himself ablaze in protest for the genocide and the persecution of Biafrans during Nigerian Biafran genocide war. Remember, Russia, Britain, Egypt, Nigeria, and other countries that were supporting Nigeria at that time, we are fighting these people of Biafrans, trying to annihilate them, trying to flush them away from the surface of the earth, and the whole world was silent. Our people really suffered though. The whole world was silent. So when this guy saw what was happening, he said, no, enough is enough. This is a crime against humanity. He came at the front of their school, Columbia University. Go and browse it. It is everywhere. Go and browse it. And he poured gasoline on himself and set himself ablaze. Immediately this guy did this. The whole world stood up on the stage. They say, what is happening? Enough is enough. That's how the world started thinking on how to stop the genocide of Biafrans during the Nigerian Biafra war. Remember, Biafrans fought the Great Russia, Great Britain, Egypt, Nigeria, and other countries of the world. without help from anybody. They were able to stand strong to resist all these countries for 3 good years. Our people really tried. Biafra soldiers really tried. I no go lie you. God bless our ancestors. God bless Mazin Nandekano, who also sacrificed everything he has. How? God bless him. God bless Simon Ekpa. And God bless all the lovers of freedom. You watching this video, God will also bless you. You will be alive to celebrate Biafra. Right now, the whole world is talking about Biafra. The whole world is talking about Biafra.
South Africa burned their shops for holding a cultural ceremony. In March 2026, the Igbo community in Gukombo in Eastern Cape, I don't know if I'm saying the name right, gathered to hold a cultural ceremony where they elected a man called Solomon Ezeko as their Eze Igbo. That is the leader of the Igbo community. And this is something Igbo people have done for generations. The South African leaders were upset by this and they called it an insult that Igbo people are coming to their land and electing a chief. Protests erupted. The Nigerian government sent a representative to go to South Africa to apologize to the South African government. And Solomon Ezeko and his family were given till August to leave South Africa. Now, before anybody decides whether the Igbo community was wrong or right, let's think about the Chinese people. In every country that Chinese people have settled, they have had their own voluntary associations, their own chambers of commerce, their own Chinatown. Everywhere there's a Chinatown. And the countries do not call it an insult. Nobody calls it an insult. It's what? Business. Then the Jewish people. The Jewish people, the most powerful diasporan communities in human history. In every country that they inhabit, they have their own community councils, their own leaderships, their own businesses. They even influence the government. And yet again, nobody calls it an insult. Igbo people are everywhere in this world. And everywhere we go, we organize. We organize associations, we organize councils, we have Ohanese communities. And this is not intended to be a separate government or to replace the government of the country where they live. The idea behind it is to be able to care for one another in an organized way. So if someone is in trouble or someone needs help, they know who to go to. The Chinatown in Johannesburg has not been burnt down. The Indian communities date back to generations, even up to apartheid, and they are seen as a separate legal entity. So why is it that when Igbo people decide to organize, it is seen as provocation, but for other people, it's culture?
All right, my people, I have made my own presentation. Like I said, we are going to meet in the comment section so that we can talk one-on-one there concerning this particular topic. Well, if you are not interested in dropping any comment, don't forget to share this video, like it, so that people that wants to talk can also talk. But I believe that this particular thing I've said is very important to every Igbo man, so that we can be able to take a kind of statistics to know where we stand and what Igbos really want in their life. Well, I am still Chinedu until I come your way next time. I say bye.